We're talking today with Larry Nelson of Kalamazoo, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, Larry, can you start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
Well, I was born in Warren, Ohio in 1924, and I lived there and went to high school there.
Okay, what did your family do for a living when you were growing up?
My father was a cost accountant, and my mother was a stay-at-home mother.
Okay, and did your father keep his job through the 30s?
Yes, he did.
And who was he working for?
Republic Steel Corporation.
Okay.
That's when steel was big in that area, in the Youngstown, Warren area.
Right, but even with the Depression and so forth, they had enough to do to...
Well, I can remember him coming home from work and saying, well, I got a 10% cut in my pay today, or got a 5% cut. You don't hear that anymore, but in his day, that was common.
Yeah, and it's better than going part-time or getting fired.
Oh yeah, no part-time. He was necessary, but they just didn't have the money.
Right. And how many kids were in the family?
Just me. I'm an only child, a spoiled brat.
All right. Now, before Pearl Harbor happened, were you paying much attention to the situation in the world with the war in Europe, that kind of thing?
Well, somewhat. My father was very flying oriented. He took me everywhere that there was airplanes or dirigibles or anything. And so he knew what was happening on the war front. And he never dreamed that I would get into it, but I did. And I got into it partially through his interest in war and that sort of thing. Being an only child, my mother didn't like very much what was happening, but the first thing that we ran into was that in 1942, I signed up to go in to the Air Cadets, actually at Ohio State University. And it was a program sponsored by the Army. Well, when the war broke out and it was obvious that I was going to be caught, I went down to the recruiting station, and the Navy was on one side of the aisle and the Army was on the other side. So I kind of tipped my hat for the Navy, and I went into the Navy place. And they started me through, but then they found out that I was an Ohio State student, so they said, I'm sorry, but you're Army, not Navy. So go across the aisle and start all over.
All right. Now, why would being at Ohio State make a difference there?
Because they were Army ROTC.
Okay. Now, was ROTC something that was required of all male students going in?
I think so. I'm pretty sure that was.
So in a lot of the state schools at that time, the first 2 years you had to do ROTC. That
Yeah,
was
ROTC,
common.
right.
Okay, and because it was Army, that was how you were marked.
That's right, and they put me in, and they give us a uniform. We had a uniform, we marched, we did all the things that beginners do. And so I ended up in the Army ROTC in the cadet training program.
Okay, now before you get into that further, let's back up a little bit. How did you learn about Pearl Harbor?
I was sitting at my desk doing my homework in that chair that you're sitting in, and my father came up the steps and said, Larry, Pearl Harbor has been attacked, and he was very solemn. And I didn't really grasp the significance of the situation until later. But I soon learned what it really meant and what was happening around me, because all of my friends who didn't choose to go to college were being signed up for the Army or Navy or whatever. And so I knew it wasn't far from me. So I signed up for the cadet program, and in signing up, I figured, they told me I had a 4-year deferment because I was a college boy. So I told my mother, and of course, being 17, they had to sign too, and they agreed to it. And after 2 months, I got a letter saying, sorry, but your 4-year deferment is now stopped. And so I went into, within 2 months, I was marching in the Army ROTC in San Antonio, Texas.
All right. And when exactly did that start?
That started February of 1943.
Okay. So you were still 18 at that point?
Yeah, let's see.
Yeah, not 24. Yeah, because your birthday hadn't happened yet. Okay. you were talking a little bit before this about the kind of the Air Cadet program. How much of what you got in basic training did they actually cover with the Air Cadets?
Well, it was quite similar, but more intensive, I guess you'd say. It was almost like I was starting over and doing the same thing over again to a degree. But it didn't last long because they were in a big hurry to get things going. Now, when you consider all these kids all over the United States doing this, the organization to do this must have been tremendous. Somebody knew what they were doing because they had guys coming from my locale to Texas, from Washington State to Texas, everywhere. And we all got together and they started weeding us out. And the way they weeded us out was by your physical and by your mental. And they gave us tests. And if you were lucky to get through both the physical and the mental, then you were in and marching.
All right. Now, at this point, were you on a track toward becoming a pilot, or is that what most of the guys with you were trying to do?
Yes, definitely. We all wanted to be pilots. Unfortunately, some guys got to be bomber pilots, which was much more of a problem because they got shot down a lot. Fighter pilots didn't get shot down so much, but when they did, it was the end. But yes, I had my heart set on being a fighter pilot.
All right. And why was that preferable?
Well, in my growing up days, my dad took me to the National Air Races in Cleveland, Ohio, where I saw Roscoe Turner and Sam Whitman and Art Chester and all the racing pilots fly their planes. And little did I realize that what they did, I'd be doing very shortly, because in the first place, for a Thompson Trophy race, they would all line up across the field and go down all at once. Well, that's what I ended up doing with fighter planes. We lined up 8 abreast and took off.
Mm-hmm. All right, but what you thought of as flying, that was really what the fighters did, the smaller planes, single pilot, that kind of thing.
They were different than bombers. Bombers always took off 1 or 2 at a time and lumbered into the sky and lumbered around. I didn't like that. I wanted more flexibility.
Okay. All right. So the first stage of training, you're doing a lot of testing. Aside from the physical and mental tests, what else are you doing in those first weeks?
Well, calisthenics was big because they wanted us to be in tip-top shape, and I was in tip-top shape when I finished that program. But then we go half a day for calisthenics, running cross countries, doing that sort of thing. Now that I think back on it, I was amazed at how organized it really was and how effective it was too, because the guys that came through that successfully were tip-top shape and ready to go, mentally and physically.
Okay. Now, how long did that first phase last?
About 2 to 3 months at the most.
Okay. And what happened to you once that was done?
Then they put a sign up on the bulletin board, who goes where and do what. And at that point, they started weeding us out between fighters and bombers. And I was lucky enough to go to Chickasha, Oklahoma, where we had PT-19s, where they were single engine. And that was the beginning of my fighter pilot days.
Okay. Now, the PT-19, single engine plane, how else would you describe it?
Open cockpit, low wing, fun to fly. Fun to fly.
Okay. Now, was it a monoplane or a biplane?
Monoplane.
Okay. Because I guess a lot of guys started in a Stearman.
I know they did. A lot of them did. And I never have flown a 2-wing plane or a Stearman type plane. Mine have all been low wing fighters.
Okay. All right. And so how long was that first round?
2 months.
Okay. And how large a group do you think you were training with?
60 probably.
Okay. And how many of them got through the 2 months?
Well, in primary, they really washed us out a lot. I'm not sure of the statistics on that, but I know that a lot of guys just couldn't learn how to fly. They just weren't capable.
Now, this was this a single seater or two-seater?
Two-seater.
Okay, so you had an instructor with you, so you
had
weren't
an
going by
instructor
yourself at
with
that
us,
point. Okay.
But it is where I first soloed. At the end of my time there, my instructor took me out to a small airfield outside of town and landed and got out and said, take her around. And that was my first solo.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, were they supposed to do that? Was that part of the process?
That was part of the process.
Okay.
If you made it that far, you're in.
Now, at this point, did you have civilian instructors or military?
Civilian.
Okay. All right.
Although we had a Czech pilot who was a military man. He was probably a first or second lieutenant, but the Czech pilot, the final Czech, was a military man.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So you spend sort of 2 months in that stage of training. Where do you go next?
I went to basic training, which we moved up to a Vultee trainer, a two-seater also. It was my first one was an open cockpit, but my second one was all glassed in, and it was a BT-13, and we went through virtually the same thing. We learned things like spins and loops and things like that we did, and it was accelerated because in 2 months we had to become proficient in that plane before we went to the next one, so I did that.
Okay. Now, one thing that occurs to me here, which is a little bit of a sidetrack, the military for much of World War II was insistent that pilots be college graduates or something close to that. How did you manage to get in being that young?
They needed lots of people, and there weren't a lot of people in that category. So they took the next best thing and got guys who were in college, but not through college, just starting. I was in my freshman year at the time.
Okay, so you got on the low end, but
yeah, it was.
But ultimately, you passed all their tests.
Oh yeah, I passed all the tests, did everything.
Okay, so you've got in your second 2 months. Did you have a similar attrition rate, or now were most of the guys?
In the Vultee vibrator, we went on cross countries, and we did a lot of things that were accelerated, and some guys just couldn't keep up. And I lived at a place called Coffeyville, Kansas, for my basic training, and we called it Coffeyville, Kansas, because so many guys got killed. Mm-hmm. Just couldn't handle it. So it whittled the class down further too.
Okay, so training accidents were pretty common then.
Oh, very common. Guys would come in and land on top of another plane taking off, and it was really ridiculous. Just a bunch of kids. We were just out of high school.
Okay. Now, at this stage, did you do any night flying?
Oh yeah, we did night flying. At night we do night cross countries, and we did that in advanced training too. Night cross countries were a regular staple from there on because we were going to fly anytime, anywhere, and they wanted to get us up to par. I still marvel at the guys who planned all this because they did a good job.
Yeah. And now, when you're in a place like Coffeyville, Kansas, now did you get any free time? Would you go into town, such as it was, or?
Every time I changed bases, I found a girl I could date, and a place would make me a bacon, egg, lettuce, and tomato sandwich with a chocolate milkshake. And that were my two things that I did each place I went to. And the girls were nice. At the primary flying school, the girl I met was at Oklahoma College for Women, and she was a banker's daughter. And so I got to drive his car around, and that's something that I'll never forget. And he always had a nice new car, so I drove a nice new car around and dated her. Then we moved on to Coffeyville, Kansas, and the same thing. I met a gal in my place to get my bacon, egg, lettuce, and tomato sandwiches, and spent 2 months having a great time. Then we moved on to advanced training, which was at Texas. I can't think of the name of it. Anyway, there we went to the HE-6. Was you've probably seen a lot of HE-6s in movies because they use them to depict fighter planes of World War II, which they weren't really. Mm-hmm. And they were very souped up, very high-powered. And right at the very end of that time, they brought in P-40s, which was a fighter plane.
Mm-hmm.
And they introduced us to the P-40 and gave us a pilot information file and said, read it and go fly the P-40. There was only room for one guy in P-40, so no room for an instructor. In advanced school, there was at least room for an instructor, but I never saw an instructor after that.
All right. But they didn't have any people on the ground running the program?
Oh yeah, we had a lot of people on the ground running the program.
But not people who were pilots who were telling you what to do?
I think not. I remember one guy, his name was Captain Kitley. And the thing about him was he liked to shoot pool, so we shot pool every day. We had free time. And it was interesting.
Okay. Now, how was flying in a P-40, aside from being one man, how was that different from flying in a trainer?
A tremendous difference. In the first place, you sat back in the airplane a ways, and the front of the plane was kind of up in the air, and you had to look outside to see the ground. Otherwise, we were up on top of it and we could see down. But in a P-40, it has so much power. Man, when you push that throttle forward, it went. And I remember my first takeoff, I still can remember that. I just kind of eased up and eased around and followed the flight pattern.
Isn't that the one you went through the trees?
No, that's later. That's later.
All right. Okay. Now, when you made that switch to the P-40s, did you again have problems with guys having accidents because they weren't used to it, or by now were you good enough that they were doing better?
Don't remember any accidents, to say the truth,
Okay.
in a P-40. The guys were getting proficient, and the ones that made it that far were usually pretty good.
Okay. Now, at the time you're in the advanced training there and getting into the P-40s, I mean, how large a group were you with at that point?
Well, I'd say we're down to around 30 or 35 probably.
Now, does this include people who came from other training units originally and came together, or is this all your same
all
bunch?
one training unit right there.
Okay. So it's the same group of guys, and you start with 60 or so at the beginning, and now...
Yeah, it was the same guys I've been with all along, yeah,
Right.
except there were fewer of them.
Right. Okay. Now, once you finished the advanced training, were you ready to get assigned to a
Oh yeah, I was ready and they were ready, and so I can't remember if I went by train or truck or what. Went to Bruning, Nebraska, and that was the training base for P47 Thunderbolts.
Okay.
I'm really more proficient in Thunderbolt than a Mustang, but because I've got more time in it. But if you know a Thunderbolt, they're big, big airplanes, and it made the P-40 look like nothing. And they jammed us in there. There's no room for an instructor. Give you the pilot information file, tells you the stalling speed and so forth, and it said go fly them. And so at first they had us go out solo and fly around and get used to the plane. And then we went out in groups. The fun group, I remember, was follow the leader, because our leader usually was a seasoned pilot, and he'd go along doing slow rolls and loops and so forth. And the thing is, we followed what he did with us. And so you'd see 8, 10, 12 planes in a line doing the same things, you know. And that's the way they made us proficient.
Right. Now, would the lead pilot be somebody who actually had combat experience at this point? Or?
No, I don't think so, but he was very proficient.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of instructors never saw combat, but they were good. They were good flyers.
Okay. And to what extent now were they actually teaching you combat tactics?
Well, that came along later. Actually, in the Thunderbolt, the strong point of a Thunderbolt is dive bombing and strafing and skip bombing. And we went to Pierre, South Dakota. They had a base there, and they had us do skip bombing, which carry a bomb in real low and skip it into a target. Or we'd strafe something on the ground. And we did some tow targets too. A plane would tow a target and you'd go around and shoot at the tow target. And that's the beginning of our real training to do something useful.
Okay. Now, as you're going through these different stages in training, did you ever encounter any female pilots?
Never did. Lots of females, but no female pilots.
Yeah, 'cause they did different kinds of things, and some of them towed targets and that sort of stuff.
No, I never saw one that did that, but I know there were some. We never knew who was pulling the target, to tell you the truth.
All right.
But I didn't envy him at all because a bunch of high school kids just have to shoot you as a target.
All right. Now, again, when you're at this stage, were they having training accidents, or was it pretty safe then? Or
Not very many. I remember some guys in doing dive bombing would go too long before they pulled out and then crash into the ground. But that was few and far between. You did hear about it once in a while, but generally speaking, we watched ourselves.
okay. Now you're talking about skip bombing. I'd heard of skip bombing being done over water, kind of like skipping a stone. But could you skip bomb on land too?
Oh yeah, we skip bombed hangars. We'd see a flight hangar the Germans had, and we'd come in just on the grass tops and get lined up, and then flick a switch, and the bomb would skip along and go right in. And if we had wing tanks on our gas tanks, we'd release those at the same time because they would also explode. So we did a double thing there.
All right. Now, did you practice dropping wing tanks when you were in South Dakota, or was that something you just learned on the job?
No, we practiced it too. And when you have wing tanks, say you had a 150-gallon wing tank, we'd use the left one like for a half an hour, and then the right one for an hour, and then the next one until the one thing I never liked was the only way you knew you were out of gas is the motor would stop, and that always scared me. And so we knew that one was empty, and then we'd go do it again the other, and then we'd drop them. We usually all drop them in unison.
Okay. Now, once you finished that round of training in the P47, approximately what date is that? How long now have you been in?
Well, let's see, 2, 4, 6 months from about August, someplace in there.
Okay, because you sort of 2 months in basic and 2
And
months
primary, basic, and advanced. There were 6,
Right.
and then we'd go. Then we went. That was it right there.
Okay. And now once you complete then that stage of training in the P47, now what do you do?
Well, we were supposedly ready, but apparently they weren't ready to take us. So I went to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where they had a big base of Thunderbolts, and we just flew around there for a month or so, getting used to things. The thing I never could stand about Baton Rouge was it had the smell of oil in the air, and I never liked that. And of course, I had my girlfriend there too, and her father happened to run a confectioner business, and that's where I got my double mint chewing gum from then on in my career in the Army, because she always sent me a carton of double mint.
She wrote to us after we were even married.
Oh yeah, I didn't even know her.
All right. Okay. And then, so basically you're just kind of marking time?
Marking time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now then, over the course of this training process, had you gotten to go home yet?
Nope.
Okay.
Not yet.
All right. So finish in Louisiana, what's the next step?
You know, I think I did have a very brief time after when I got my wings at Advanced Air School. I think I did go home for a week or so.
Okay.
But that was very short, and it was very hairy to get there and get back. But then they put us on a train heading for Norfolk, Virginia, where the Queen Elizabeth was parked. And they put 15,000 fighter pilots and bomber pilots on that boat and started us overseas. And it took 5 days to go across because we did it unescorted. That was the fastest boat on the sea, and they zoomed us right across, and we ended up in Glasgow, Scotland,
Okay.
where they unloaded us and started our training for our group.
Okay. Now, what was the sea voyage like, other than relatively quick?
The what?
What was the sea voyage like?
Oh, it was bad. I remember I was officer of the day, and had one of those just to keep peace. And the guys that shoot crap in the hole all the time. And I was supposed to break up those games. I never broke one up. And everybody turned their unknowing eye away from it because they didn't care. Also, all of us had to do KP, and I remember pulling feathers off chickens. So I was dizzy, and putting them in hot water and getting ready for dinner. It was kind of a restful thing, 5 days. I wasn't busy all the time, and I was around. Oh, at that time, one of the guys brought a baby coyote with him from Texas. And he had him inside his jacket. And everybody was oohing on about it. Of course, being officer of the day, I was supposed to say, no, you can't do that, but I couldn't do that. That coyote lived to fly some missions with his pilot friend, but he got run over by an Army truck later on, so his life was ended.
Oh.
But it was kind of fun.
Now, did people on the ship, did they get seasick, or was that not a problem?
It was a problem. And the hammocks we slept in were, I think, 4 deep. In other words, the guy above you sagged down almost to your face. So it was 4 feet deep. There were 15,000 on a boat designed for a lot less than that. And so that's the way we got over there. I'm not sure how well I slept, but I got my sleep.
All right. Now, you arrive in Scotland, then what happens to you?
Then they kind of herded us together, and here again, organization was good because they knew who was going where, and it took me to Shrewsbury, England, where they had another Thunderbolt base there, and we got to fly every day just for fun, flying around, waiting for our time to go. Then came D-Day, and they selected 10 of us to go to the 78th Fighter Group as replacements for the pilots who got lost in D-Day. And so at D-Day, I was in the flight room of the 78th Fighter Group, but not flying yet until they needed me, and then they put me in.
All right. Now, how long do you think you spent in Shrewsbury waiting for something to happen?
A month.
Okay. And in general, what was the attitude of the English people around the air bases?
Well, the guys didn't like us too much because they said we were overpaid, oversexed, and over here. And I found my English girlfriend, which she knows and knew, and we had fun in London at the Piccadilly Circus and places like that. But the people, the parents, welcomed us a lot. They had us there for dinner and stuff like that. And their dinners were not lavish at all, but of course they were on a wartime footing. And so we managed to do okay, and I went to a lot of dances. One thing I found, with all the girls I met, they all liked to dance.
Joan's, your mother sent items to
Yeah.
Joan's mother that
My mother sent things to them that they didn't have.
stockings was one thing.
Stockings were one thing, yeah.
Okay. Now, where was the 78th group based?
Duxford.
Okay.
It's now at the Imperial War Museum. Have you been over there?
I haven't been to Duxford.
Okay, it's
so
the
that's the air
Imperial
part
War
of it.
Museum
At Cambridge.
It's just outside of Cambridge. And it's a permanent Army air base. They had been permanent since World War I. Worked for the British pilots. And they moved out and we moved in, and it was luxurious. We had guys that would shine our shoes and make sure we were neat and tidy, cleaned up our room, made our beds, did all sorts of things.
Didn't you call him Batman?
They call it Batman, yeah.
Batman, yeah. All right. So you've joined the 78th group. Now, what squadron were you assigned to in the 78th?
I was the 82nd Squadron.
Okay.
82nd, yeah. Some of the guys went to 82nd, some went to 83rd, and some went to 84th, depending on the losses.
All right. Now, how long did you spend waiting there before you started to fly?
It might have been close to a month.
Okay.
We still did a little flying at the field, but we didn't go into any combat at that time.
All right.
Buzzed the field once, didn't you?
Oh, yeah.
Now, do you remember the first combat mission you flew?
Oh, do I ever? I was the newest, youngest pilot, and it was what you call a maximum effort mission. That means they put every plane in the air that was flyable. Well, being the low guy in the totem pole, I got what I call a clunker. It didn't have adequate speed or anything. It just barely flew. And we lined off 8 abreast, and this is the first time I ever took off 8 abreast. And we went down the field, and I got behind, and the prop horse and the other guys swooshed me into the trees, and I knocked down a few trees and came back around, and the plane was a mess, and I still have a picture of that. And so 3 things happened that day. I got a new plane. They put that old clunker in the trash heap, and I got the day off.
Now, did anybody blame you for having wrecked the plane? Or?
Oh, no. They were just glad I made it. Yeah. Of course, here I was, a 20-year-old kid. I never had taken off 8 abreast. All my friends around me and guys were go-getters. They were hot pilots, you know. They weren't looking after me at all. But after that, I always managed to keep up.
All right. So now you've got a new plane, and you get to try.
Brand new.
Okay. So how long did you wait from the first mission to the second?
Oh, probably a week till they got the new plane in.
All right.
Yeah, a week, and it was a shiny. When all the others had attack markings on them and were in painted different colors, but mine was nice shiny silver. I like that.
Okay. So now the second mission then, how does that go?
Oh, it went very well. I kept up. I did what I was supposed to do. I don't know whether it was the second or third mission. We ran into 40 ME-109s, and so we had, there were only about 8 of us at the time, so we dove right into them, which amazed me that 8 of us would dive into 40 ME-109s. We did. We scattered them, and they never got to the bombers, and came back unscathed.
Mm-hmm. So primarily then your missions were bomber escort?
Not exactly, because we had 3 squadrons that would go out. One squadron would go down low and dive bomb and strafe, and the other 2 would stay up with the bombers. Then when the ones finished down low, they could come up and go with the bombers, have them release their bombs and their wing tanks, and then the other group would go down and do it. So we managed to create havoc wherever we went.
Now, when you were doing that and you were attacking targets on the ground, were there planned targets or was it just targets of opportunity?
Targets of opportunity, exactly. There were many trains going along the track, and we managed to blow those all up. And some of them exploded right in front of us. But we always liked to hit the locomotive because they really let off the steam when we hit them. We had 850 caliber machine guns in this Thunderbolt, and it was devastating.
All right. Now, where did you fly to? What were the targets for the bombers?
Munster was one of them. We eventually got to Berlin in the Mustang, but not in the Thunderbolt because they didn't have enough gas. But I can't remember all the names of the
one
town.
that we saw the cathedral when we were over
Cologne,
there.
Cologne Cathedral. We went to Cologne a lot of times,
They rebuilt.
but we never damaged the cathedral. Never got damaged. And I remember flying around the cathedral looking at it and how beautiful it was, but we never shot at it.
Okay. Now, do you remember the first time you actually shot something down?
Well, the only time I shot down an ME-262. I was coming back from a mission, and I saw these planes down below taking off and landing, and I called my group commander and said, "There's some planes down there. We go down and take a look?" And he said, "Take your wingman with you and go take a look." So I put her into a steep dive. I was doing over 500 when I got in the tail of an ME-262. I think he was surprised that I was there, and he took me around his airfield as low as he could so the other guys on the airfield could shoot at me. But I got so close to him they couldn't shoot at me without shooting at him. So he bellied in the middle of the airfield, and then I stayed real low and got away from all the flak and everything, and I made it out successfully, and that was the only time I had the opportunity to do anything.
Okay. So when you encountered the Germans who were trying to attack the bombers, the purpose was just to chase them off.
Yep.
Now, did they try to bait you into pursuing them?
No, not necessarily. They were just up there to shoot down bombers, and they really considered us a thorn in their side because we just went after them, helter-skelter. And they moved out. After a while, they got out of it and flew back home. We had a huge advantage over them because we had better pilots, we had better planes, and we had young guys that didn't know any better.
All right. Well, would you use the P47 to actually sort of dogfight or try?
Oh yeah, and it was a good dogfighter, especially at altitude. It had these broad wings, and it didn't stall at high altitude like some planes. But then when we switched to the Mustang, it was good at all altitudes, and it only had 650 calibers, but it was very effective.
Okay. When did you make the switch from P47 to the Mustang?
Okay, it was December of 1944.
Yeah.
And all I remember is that I was down the flight line. I saw all these brand new P51s coming in, and they would get into our beloved Thunderbolts and fly them away, and we never saw them again. And I had a meeting with pilots and said, "Read your pilot information file and get ready to fly Mustangs." So we're flying Mustangs tomorrow.
And did you get to actually practice in them before you took them on a mission?
Yeah, we had a couple of practice rounds, just takeoff and landing, just to get the feel of them, but not really very much, although they were easier to fly than the Thunderbolt by far.
Why was it easier to fly than a Thunderbolt?
They were lighter. The power in a P51 was very adequate. Now, the Thunderbolt was a little bit of a lumbering thing. You had to give it a lot of juice to get it to do anything. And they were slow to react, but the P51 was quick to react. I liked it.
Okay. Now, what did you think of the different German aircraft that you encountered in terms of...
Well, the ME-109 was very comparable to anything we had, and they were very maneuverable. The FW-190, not so much. It was not, I didn't think it was quite the plane that the others were. Oh, of course, if they'd gotten the ME-262s up in strength, we'd have been in trouble because they were fast and sleek. And the only problem was that the pilots that flew them really weren't that good at it. They were very careful, I thought.
Yeah. Now, did you actually encounter them up when they were attacking bombers, or did you only see them at occasionally?
I only saw them occasionally because they'd go up and shoot and go home because they ran out of gas in a hurry. They didn't have that much fuel, so they could stay up. If Hitler put his mind to ME-262s, we'd have trouble because they were a good plane.
All right.
It was the first jet of all.
Okay. Now, let's go back to sort of the life on the base in Duxford. What kind of community was around in that area? What kind of...
Typical British, all British. We went into town and went to dances in Cambridge, and there were lots of people there, lots of girls. When we had dances, boy, we had plenty of women show up. And it was just a nice community. It was a very small community, and we went to what they call pubs, and they were really low ceiling things. You walk into them, even I had to be careful because they were so low ceiling, and I was short. But tall guys had problems.
All right. Now, what was sort of the kind of daily, weekly routine like when you're on the base at Duxford?
Well, the day we were flying, of course, there was one instance where they come around, about like 4 o'clock in the morning, and wake us up, say you're on today, you're flying today. Sometimes that happened when I didn't know I was, but most of the time I knew I was flying that day. But on a maximum effort mission, sometimes they just got us all up. And we went down, and the reward for flying that day was that we got a fresh egg. So they had guys frying fresh eggs any way you like them, and that was really a treat. And when we finished breakfast, well, we'd all go across the street to the flight room where we got our instructions. And in my book, I remember the MP that was at the gate called me Shorty Sir. He always called me Shorty Sir. And I never forgot that, but he was a nice guy.
All right. Now, what time in the morning would you get up if you had a mission?
4 or 5 o'clock, very early.
Okay.
And when we did that, we could hear the bombers already forming because they had to get up and get going before we did. So they must have gotten up like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning to get going. And of course, they didn't take off as fast as we did, so it took time.
Okay. Now, would the bombers sort of take off first, and then you follow and catch up?
Oh yeah, we'd follow them and catch up. We'd have a point where we'd meet them along the coast before they went into enemy territory.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then how close to or far away from the bomber formations would you be when you were flying?
Oh, we were right on top of them. We had each squadron would kind of go along, and if it was an upper squadron, we'd go above the bombers and go back. We were so much faster than they were,
Mm-hmm.
so we had to do a lot of S-turning to slow down. But we kept that up, and when we got into enemy territory, why, then we had to have our eyes open. I think we looked like a very ponderous group coming at them because there were so many of us. I can remember times when they told me there were as many as 1,000 airplanes up there, and I marveled at that.
Okay. And then to what extent was the flak or anti-aircraft fire a problem for the fighters?
They shot at us, but we were weaving around and we were harder to hit.
Mm-hmm.
The bombers just flew straight and level, so they made it an easy target. And the flak was pretty accurate on the bombers, but I remember flying alongside one guy and he got a direct hit from a flak, but that's the worst thing I saw.
Now, what altitude would you normally fly at?
15,000, probably,
Okay.
15,000 feet.
So it would be the heavy guns, like the 88s or something that shoot that.
Oh yeah, the 88s and those kind.
Okay. And then, did the Germans have, when the German fighters showed up, did they have any standard practice or tactic they used? Or?
Oh, they'd string out and they'd pick on a group, usually a low squadron that were back a ways or something, and they'd start picking up the guys in the tail, the ones that were easiest to hit.
Mm-hmm.
Those bombers did have a lot of guns on them. I think they had as high as 10 guns that would shoot at them. So it wasn't easy pickings, but they were going so fast, and our guys really, it was hard to get proficient at shooting down a fighter.
Mm-hmm. And then, what did you do in terms of your own tactics to kind of deal with
We'd
Germans?
intervene. We'd see where they were lined up, and we'd go right after them. And usually our group commander and squadron commanders and flight commanders would all shoot. And as a wingman, it was my thing to keep any fighters off their tail.
Mm-hmm.
And so anytime I saw anybody coming towards them, I'd turn into them. And I don't think I ever lost a leader what that means.
Okay. Now, how long did you fly through the whole rest of the war, or is okay? So you didn't have a mission limit.
Just after VE Day to VJ D-Day, I flew right after D-Day and flew to VAE Day.
Okay. And how many missions total was that?
66.
66. Okay. And over the course of that time, what kind of losses did your squadron or group take?
Well, when we did dive bombing and strafing, we lost a lot of guys. I don't know. I do know that guys that were in our barracks the night before weren't there the next day, and they just nothing ever said. Some of them got shot down, some of them parachuted, and I never knew what happened to them. But out of the 10 guys that went in with me, only 2 of us survived over the whole war.
Right.
He doesn't know if they were killed or just.
I don't know what happened to them. Don't know what happened to them.
Yeah. All right. Now, how badly damaged did your plane ever get hit?
Nope. Never got hit. I tell you, people, my crew were always amazed that I didn't have a bunch of holes in my plane, but I didn't.
All right. You mentioned a crew. Do you have a particular group of ground crew who
3
were all...
guys, yeah.
Okay.
And a crew chief, an armor, and I guess he was kind of a general handyman. He was a gunner replacement and that sort of thing.
What about your Batman, honey? Was he?
Well, he wasn't part of that. He was something else.
He's back in the...
Yeah, he's back in the barracks.
All right. And, well, what do you remember about your ground crew?
Oh, they were great guys. When we got married in Warren, in Pomeroy, Ohio, my
Was
John
Johnny,
Sassaman, what was he? He was my...
Was he your crew chief or what?
No, he was the armor. I think he was the armor. He came, he and his wife and son came to our wedding. And we had a close association for many years. And there's a couple of books out that have a picture of all my crew and myself. It's called Legends of the Sky, and I, someplace in my stuff, have a copy of it. But it was a nice thing, and they were nice guys.
Okay. And where were they from?
He was from Selins Grove, Pennsylvania.
Johnny was.
Yeah, Johnny Sassman.
I don't know the others.
And Bose, my crew chief, he was from California. And my other guy, I never knew where he was from.
All right. Now, normally the way military works, there's supposed to be kind of a separation between officer and enlisted.
Not in the Air Force.
But not...
Not in the Air Force. We were buddies, all of us.
All right. Now, did you have sort of friends among the other pilots in the squadron?
Oh yeah, I still maintain contact with Huey Lamb, who lives in Austin, Texas, and is my age, and he and I are the 2 that I know that are still living from that group.
What about the one that was in Kansas, honey?
Well, I don't know about Hewitt. His name was Hewitt. Can't think of his first name. Anyway, he may still be living, but he was older, and there's a good chance he died.
All right. Now, while you're flying these missions and so forth, how much attention are you paying to kind of the larger progress of the war, or how much are you aware of?
Oh, they had maps in there, and we had briefings from time to time about where it was, and everybody was interested. And we had the Stars and Stripes magazine, or a newspaper, which really was a good newspaper, and they kept us up to date on what was happening, and I read it diligently. When they came out, all of us jumped for the Stars and Stripes.
Okay. Now, when the Battle of the Bulge started in December, did that affect what you guys did?
Oh, yeah. Then we did maximum efforts several times. Some guys flew more than once a day. I only flew once a day. But we went in there and dive bombed and strafed everything and tried to keep the Germans from getting in there and doing any harm. But it was a tough, and it was winter, and there was a lot of snow on the ground, and it was about that time they started wearing those red-orange vests, so you could tell which was friendly and which was foe. And that worked okay, except the Germans got a hold of some of them, and then we weren't shooting at them because they had those on, so that didn't work out too well.
Yeah, how did they, when you've got you're trying to intervene, you're trying to do ground support, which is not primarily, trained for necessarily. How do you get targeted, or how does that work so you know?
There was a guy on the ground, and we had one. I was this person. I was the coordinator of the flight, and he would talk to you and tell you where things were and where you're supposed to go, and who we're supposed to shoot at. They had it pretty well organized.
My brother-in-law was on the ground in the
Yeah, he was.
Battle of the Bulge.
Yes, he was.
And he came back.
Yeah.
All right. Now, were you able to go after tanks or just soft targets? Or?
Oh, we did tanks. Anytime we saw a tank, we got them.
Railroad cars.
Railroad cars was our main thing, though, because there were so many of them, and they were moving a lot of stuff around. Trying to, anyway, and we blew up their tracks, and it made it kind of hard for them to get anywhere.
Now, what would you use against a tank?
Oh my! 50 caliber armor-piercing incendiary bullets would do some damage, but then we did have our skip bombs. But of course, you only skip bomb once, and then you're all out of bombs, because we just had one on each wing, and we dropped them both at the same time.
Yeah, because a lot of the German armor was fairly heavily armored and protected, and so 50 caliber might not necessarily take it out.
No, it might not. It was a problem for them. All these 50 caliber bullets flying through the air.
Okay. Now, when you're doing particularly the ground support over the Bulge, were there days when you just couldn't fly at all?
Oh yeah, there were bad days, snow, and the clouds were right down to the ground, and we had to wait. And when there was a break, they'd take us off. And in our group, since we took off 8 at a time, they figured they'd get more of us into the air than anybody that was needed, so they called on us quite often.
All right. Was there a particular kind of mission that you really didn't like, or place that you didn't want
I
to go
didn't
to?
like flying over water. We had some missions that about 90% of the mission was over water, and I didn't like that. We went to P Monday, where they had the U-2 things, and
V2, yeah.
I never liked flying over water because only one engine and all that. But I never had a problem.
Okay. What about flying to Berlin?
Oh, that was when we started that. We had the Mustangs after January, but then those were long missions. But we just blew up everything we saw, and we slowed their advance, I'm sure. But it was tough.
Okay. Now, I think in you've written up some memoirs, and there's a mention there of encountering Marlene and Dietrich.
Oh, Marlena. They had movie stars come to our base quite often, USO programs. And this particular day, Marlena came with a group. I don't think Bob Hope was with her then, but anyway, after she finished her performance, she came down off the stage and came right in front of me. And I said, "Would you give me your autograph, please?" And she said, "Yeah, give me something to write on." And I didn't have anything to write on, so she took my hat off, she turned it upside down, pulled her dress up, laid it across her leg, and wrote Marlena. And I still have that hat in the Kalamazoo Air Museum.
We hope so.
It's still there, I know it's still.
Well, you don't know if it's yours.
Marlena. It says Marlena. And I thanked her.
Yeah. That's something you're not going to forget.
No, I won't forget that.
Do you remember what other stars came through? Whether
Yeah, Bob Hope, Bing Crosby, Francis Langford. I know they're all. Oh, I know Agassi's girlfriend. What's her name? Anyway, she came.
Oh yeah, Agassi's wife,
Yeah, Agassi's wife.
the tennis player.
Yeah, no, not the tenth player. The girl before, his first wife.
Oh,
She was there, but I can't think of her name. But anyway, she was there.
do you know Agassi, the tennis player?
Yeah, but he'd be awfully young to have a wife who.
Yeah, well, he was later on that he had her for a wife. Because she was very young when she was there. I think she was only 18 when she was on the USO program.
All right.
Can't think of her name, though. Anyway.
You're not thinking like of Dinah Shore or something like
No,
that.
Dinah Shore. I don't think I ever saw Dinah Shore. I know she was out there. It was a big occasion when they came because everybody flocked down to the flight hangar and they had a stage set up and they performed. Bob Hope was always funny. Yeah.
Okay. Now, as you're kind of getting down into the last days of the war and so forth, were you kind of looking forward to having it be over and you could just go home, or did you want to keep
I was,
going?
except little did I realize that over meant going to Japan because I got a 2-week leave at home and then they put me on the train to go to Santa Ana, California, where a bunch of us were put together to go to Okinawa. And that's when Harry Truman dropped the second bomb, and they said it's all over. And then they turned us around and we come back to Fort Thomas, Kentucky, I think. Anyway, we came back to another base and they ushered us out. The ones with the most points, they determine points by your number of missions and by the time in and so forth. And I was one of the first let out because I had the most of anything. And when I came through the group that ushers us out, they were recommending to me that I go to University of Pennsylvania at Wharton to do my college, and I had already been a student at Ohio State. And I went out there and I passed their tests, but then I found out that I have to go 4 whole years, that they wouldn't accept any of my credits that I had already earned. So I went back to Ohio State and did it in 2.5 years.
Okay. Now, to back up a little bit back during the war and while you're still in Europe, do you remember hearing about President Roosevelt dying?
Oh yeah, that was, I can still picture that, how gloomy everybody was in our barracks that the president died. Yeah, it was quick news and we all got it.
Mm-hmm. And did you know anything about Harry Truman at that point? Or?
No, very little about Harry Truman.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, did you have anybody in your squadron who actually was allowed to go home or before the end of the war, or because of the nature of it, you all had to stay in?
No, we all took our turn. I didn't know anybody that left early.
Now, were you pretty much the senior guy by the time the war ended?
By what?
Were you pretty much the senior guy or the one with the most experience?
Well, I was one of the most experienced, but not age-wise. I just
Mm-hmm.
time-wise. A lot of guys that were more senior got killed, one way or another,
Mm-hmm.
and they were leading the groups in the squadron forays, so they're the ones that took the brunt of it. But I was right in there.
Okay. Now you had kind of a lower level leadership position where you would lead other planes, or just a...
I was what you call an element leader. I had an element that I led, and that was first lieutenant status as an element leader.
Mm-hmm. And how many planes would be in an element?
4, probably.
Okay. So you normally flew in groups of 8, and then...
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then that could break up into 2 4s and...
No, we broke up in four twos.
2s. Okay.
We only had 2.
So what's the significance then of leading 4 planes? I mean, do you have any control over the other pair, or...?
Not particularly. They were off on their own doing their thing. It got pretty hairy up there, especially when they turned to fight.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you have any close calls while you're in some of these
Throughout my
actions?
flying career, I had a lot of close calls, but in combat, I had no close calls, except for the takeoff that I crashed.
Mm-hmm.
But in the training, I got lost on a night cross country and flew out over the Gulf of Mexico, and finally ended up landing at Corpus Christi near where I stayed to find out where I was,
Mm-hmm.
and I stayed there all night. I had some close calls, but not bad ones.
All right.
I had a few, but not too many to mention.
All right. Now, I guess to think over the time that you spent there in Europe and flying missions, are there particular incidents that kind of stand out in your memory that you haven't brought into the story here yet?
I guess, I don't know. One thing that stands out in my mind was when I was chasing the ME-262, and he was at housetop level. I remember my bullets crashing into houses behind him when I was shooting at him. And then he dropped over and dropped down, and then he bellied in. But those memories come back to me a little bit.
Okay, this tape is about up, so I'm going to stop right. Okay, now we kind of gotten your story sort of down toward the end of the war. So I'm going to go back again, go back to May of 1945. Before the German surrender, was there any talk about where you were going to go or what you were going to do, or was it?
No. You know, if they'd had any talk, they would have said, you're going over and fight Japan.
Right. Okay.
You were in California.
Yeah, I was
They
in
sent you to
California. I ended up at Santa Ana,
Okay.
ready to take off for Okinawa.
Okay. But where were you when the Germans surrendered?
Uh,
Were you still in England at that point?
I think I was still in England, yeah.
Okay. And then how did they get you back from England to the States?
Boat. They had a lot of little boats. It came over on the Queen Elizabeth, but the one we went back on was just a little tiny boat. And they loaded a couple hundred of us on that thing, and they had a whole bunch of them, and we bounced across the Atlantic. And I remember I rode it with a guy from Kalamazoo at the time. I didn't know I was going to end up in Kalamazoo.
Mm-hmm.
But his name was Howard Seeley. And I've asked the Seeley dealership if they know about Howard, and I don't find too many people know who he was. But he was an older guy he ended up to be a lieutenant colonel. He stayed in.
Mm-hmm.
And we just took this little boat back, and I can't remember where we landed, probably in Norfolk. But then we took the train home.
Mm-hmm.
But I was only home a couple of weeks, and then I had to go to California. I had got a lot of train rides, I'll tell you that.
I'll bet.
You got to give credit to the people who planned this. I mean, when you got all these guys and they got a mission to accomplish, how do you make it happen? Because you have to have transportation, you have to have food, you have to have lodging, you have to have everything. And they did a good job of it. These old guys that did the planning, they didn't have computers in those days, but they did a good job.
Okay. Now, when you were doing a cross-country train trip or something like that, I mean, how did they feed you and take care of you? And
We were in club cars, and the Santa Fe Scout was the one I took last, and it did not have air conditioning. We had the windows open, and the soot from the engine came in, and we were a mess. It was hot and humid and dirty.
mm-hmm. And how often would you stop?
We stopped at all the places that they normally stop, Needles. I remember different towns that they stopped at and let us off to go to a restaurant or something, short time, and then get us back on. But it was a fun trip, really.
Now, on any of the trips you took, were there times where they just put you off on a siding and let other trains go by?
Oh, I think we were the ones that went by, and the other trains stopped. Mm-hmm. Unless it was a troop train, I don't remember that.
Yeah. Because some of the troop trains, guys on those talk about how they'd sit and they'd wait for the freight trains to go by. But you don't remember that happening, do you?
No, I don't remember that particularly.
Okay. Now, did they make any effort to encourage you to stay in the military, or were they just trying to get rid of guys?
Left it up to me entirely.
Okay.
And before I left my base, I made the decision not to stay in. And the guys that made the decision to stay in then went on to other places, and they ended up flying jets.
Mm-hmm.
I never flew a jet, but they ended up flying jets, and they got increases in rank. Most of them became lieutenant colonels at least.
Mm-hmm.
And me, I was satisfied just to go home.
All right. So you went home, you decided to go back to Ohio State.
Yep.
What did you major in?
In accounting, in
Okay.
general business.
All right. And then what kind of job did you get when you got out?
An accounting job at the Upjohn Company. here in Kalamazoo, and that's how I got to Kalamazoo.
Mm-hmm.
They had a training program at the Upjohn Company, and they were taking guys that I was in the second group of trainees that came into Kalamazoo to Upjohn to get in the training program.
So basically, that's your first job right out of college?
My first and only job, and I stayed there 36 years.
Okay. To look back at the time that you spent in the military, how do you think that affected you?
Oh, it leveled me out a lot because I didn't have any idea what I wanted to do. In fact, my dad kept talking to me about metallurgy as a good thing to get into, and as a matter of fact, in my freshman year, I was aiming toward being a metallurgist, but when I came back, that's not for me. I got leveled off.
So why'd you pick accounting?
My dad was an accountant.
All right.
Yeah.
So another side of that. All right. Well, listen, thank you very much for taking the time to talk.
It's been a pleasure. I
You
enjoyed
have
it
to
all.
tell him that we met in class
Hmm?
in the junior year,
Oh, yeah.
and we're married for us.
She's the
senior
first
year.
girl I met when I came back to go to Ohio State. I came into my classroom and I sat down. There was an empty seat next to her. She came in and sat down there. They assigned that seat. When I went to my next class, sat down, and she came in and sat down beside me. I was never able to shake her.
That's his story.
That's his story. So you've got your regular pattern. You go to town, find a girl, stick with her, and she's still here.
Yeah, this one stuck with me. 67 years.
Oh, very good. Congratulations. All right.